Well, welcome back to a new episode of the Threshold Lab. And as we continue season one, diving into the inner game of coaching and leadership, I'm really excited for today's conversation with USA Women's head water polo coach, Adam Krikorian. I should have asked that on the front if I'm pronouncing that
You got
right.
it. You got it, Zach.
I got ahead of myself.
You got it. Well said.
Okay. I took a stab. Like I said, I tried to listen to some conversations on the front end, but I also realized I should have asked you first. But anyway, Adam, I'm thrilled to have you today and really excited to dive into a little bit of your journey and hear your experiences and create a space for other coaches out there to hear it as well.
Well, I appreciate it, Zach. Thanks for thinking of me and giving me this opportunity to speak with you and to dive a little bit. It's always fun diving a little deeper into our own minds and thoughts. And I find every time I do that, sometimes I'm reluctant to do it, but every time I do it, I learn a little bit more about myself and just in general as well. So looking forward to it.
Oh, awesome. Well, that'll be one thing I'll make a mental note of is I'll be curious by the end of our
Uh,
conversation what you've learned. And after talking with me, it might be something that you didn't want to learn either, or that maybe you're second guessing. But no, I'm thrilled to have you. And as I mentioned, I in preparation for this conversation, I tried to listen to a lot of different sound bites and conversations that you've had. And this is the domain of leadership is something that you've actually spoken about a lot. And I think the other cool piece of it is I've heard sound bites from former athletes and players that you've had who have also talked about your leadership. And one thing that really stood out to me was how quickly I heard them talk about your ability to be a connector and foster relationships. And when you communicate with your players, there's a almost this feeling like they feed off of just the conviction and trust that you instill in the mission and in them and so on, and really just help them feel heard. And I almost want to start there as far as where has that capacity kind of been developed from your ability to listen and connect at such a high level?
Well, when you're speaking about conviction, I mean, the first thing that pops in my mind is just that it's taken years to develop, right? And I think it's just come with experience, and I'm probably a lot more. I would like to think, at least, I'm a lot more. Uh, what I believe in, I truly believe in. Maybe whereas in the beginning, I didn't have a great understanding. I thought I believed in them, but I'm now much more firm in my beliefs and my values, so on and so forth. But I think when it comes to listening and being able to connect, I mean, those two things are so important. I often think that, and maybe I'm just saying this because I think I'm naturally quiet, but I often think that sometimes we overvalue leaders who are very talkative. Um, because I ask myself this question all the time. The more you're talking, how much are you actually listening, not only to the people that are around you and getting a sense of kind of who they are, that emotional intelligence that is so important, but also even just listening to yourself, right? And some of the best conversations you have are the ones that you have with yourself in your own mind. So where that comes from, a lot of I don't spend a ton of time reflecting, but a lot of times when I do reflect, it always kind of comes back to my childhood and how I was raised, and being the youngest of three boys, having two older brothers that I loved and admired and respected so much. I was quiet. I sat and watched, and partly because out of force, maybe, or maybe even out of fear in moments, but when you're having two brothers who you admire that are older, you sit back and you watch and you learn. Certainly, you learn maybe some what not to do at times, but you learn kind of what to do, and you learn about behavior and impact. And I think that's really where it came from. So I've always been somewhat of a quiet leader, I would say, which has given me this beautiful gift, I think, to be able to. I'm not perfect all the time, but in general, just to be able to listen and to hear people. And that allows me to really get a sense of who they are, and then that helps me obviously be able to connect with them.
This is a little bit of a cliche, but I've heard people say like if you take the word listen and you rearrange all of the letters, it actually can spell silent.
Right.
And how what you're describing is sometimes one of the more underrated tools in leadership and connection is silence and just creating space for somebody else to share and to feel heard. And I don't know if this has been your experience, but I can empathize on a personal level with some of what you just described. I'm the oldest, so the on the opposite end in terms of
Mm-hmm.
siblings, but I have always felt on a personal level like listening is I remember just growing up and sitting around the dinner table or at family functions and just listening to the adults and just learning a lot, not only through the listening but also observing. And I think that's another thing that kind of goes hand in hand with that skill is the ability to see things by not just always communicating from a leadership standpoint, but to be able to see what's visible and also what's invisible too. Could you talk a little bit about the role of just observation for you as a coach and how you use that in an advantage?
Yeah, well, I think it's body language. Obviously, I think everyone agrees. I mean, you can learn a lot from someone's body language and their facial expressions, how they carry themselves, how they react to certain environments. Even when I think about just myself with regards to even coaching in the moment in a game or maybe in a training or a practice, you can, if you're really in tune and you're really observant and you're in the moment coaching wise, which is not always easy to do in itself, but if you are, you really get a sense of not by necessarily listening to them, but by just watching them and maybe their interactions again with other people, but their interactions with themselves. Their not only their interactions, but their reactions to things that happen. And I think as I started out by saying, just reading their body language, it's those are just amazing cues for us as coaches to be able to have a better understanding of who they are, what they may be thinking, and then kind of dig into that. Noticing the times when it's the right time to kind of dig into that and dive a little deeper into what is exactly kind of going through their mind at that time.
Are there any instances or times that you can recall where you remember seeing somebody's body language and using that as a moment where maybe it sparked some insight to maybe to invite you to ask another question or to address it or to even maybe hold back when in an otherwise moment you might have stepped in?
Well, there's plenty of times I hold back because there's definitely a part of this process in which you need to let them explore themselves, and that balance of getting involved, and because you see something, but then also at times understanding that it may be not your time, and this is an important part of their thought process and their maturation is figuring it out themselves. But I mean, one just comes off the top of my head was yesterday actually in a practice in which I could tell someone was being very frustrated by the physicality of the game that was happening in practice, and specifically between her and another athlete. And for us, there's a part of the game which I think is always the most undervalued part of the game, and that's what we call transition defense or counterattack defense or fast break defense, which obviously happens after you have the ball offensively. And I remember her being really frustrated, and I could see the anger and the frustration on her face as the ball turned over and she began to swim back to play defense. And she just lost complete focus and awareness of kind of what was going on. And I just simply asked the question, after we stopped the possession, I simply asked the question, after the ball turned over, what were you thinking for the first 5 seconds? And, she sat there and took her a bit, but she, made the comment ultimately, that she was still thinking about the physicality on the other end, and not necessarily was in the moment in which she was in a position to play some good help defense, but obviously was not physically was in position, but mentally was not, was still, living in the past. So that was just an example that comes to mind. Those things happen all the time, though, all the time.
When you first talked about the role of observation and body language, like particularly you framed it around those reactions, right? And just
Mm-hmm.
sometimes how a sequence or an occurrence in a competition can create almost this residue that kind of lingers with somebody. And sometimes that's in the form of their body language. Sometimes we see that in their decision making, sometimes in their focus and so on. And I think you're raising such a um, great awareness around just being able to spot those things and then just hold space for the players to also look inward and kind of reflect and kind of course correct on their own too and kind of self-coach. It's very similar here in baseball. You don't have a coach standing next to you in the batter's box. The
Right.
last time I'm not a water polo expert. To my knowledge, you're not in the pool with your
No,
athletes,
that would be an
and so
understatement.
just being able to coach those moments and create athletes who can coach themselves is so crucial.
Well,
And
and I think one important element to that, I would say, is just I feel like I've used the word undervalued or overvalued already too much, but what's undervalued is just consistency. Being, I think so often we see these great players and we see these great athletes and they do something special um, and I think especially at our level, like everyone is good and everyone can do something great, but how often you can be great is the key, and it starts obviously in training. And when I think about consistency, it doesn't eliminate failure or mistakes, but it decreases the percentage chance of mistakes. And consistency, in my mind, is all about being present. It's about focus. It's about concentration. And it's amazing to see. I mean, that's the difference at this level. I mean, when you're talking about the Olympic elite level, it's like those skills are fairly even across the board. It's those that are able to just focus literally task by task and not be distracted by all the things that are around us that are so easily distracted, whether it's the way the officials are calling the game, the crowd in the stands, the sun, whatever it may be, just that the focus and concentration allows for that consistency to happen. And that's when you start to see greatness every single day.
this isn't where I was envisioning going, but I wanna add to that because I'm a little biased. We do talk a lot about focus and attention in our environment. We're kind of with you in terms of how important that is for not just peak performance, but sustainable, peak performance. And so for you, and I know, a little bit later in the conversation too, we'll probably dive in even more to your relationship and work with Dr. Peter Haberl, who I know is a big advocate of this as well. But I'm curious from a coaching standpoint, what are some of the ways that you've tried to enhance or deliberately maybe develop the focus for your athletes?
Um, well, I mean, the first thing I think of when you say that is just I need to be focused and present myself, right? So I don't think about what I am doing to kind of remind themselves. I need to be present and focused. And there are certainly times in which you lose concentration, and those lapses of concentration. It's so easy for your athletes to kind of follow suit. For me, it begins with myself. It begins with my ability to be how I'm prepared going into a game, going into a training session. The demands of a head coach are so much more than just the X's and O's and practice planning. Sometimes they extend far beyond what you want them to extend to. So your ability to be able to let go of those things in moments, to be able to spend the right amount of time um, doing the things that are going to help you prepare and get in the moment, that's first and foremost. Because if I'm focused, and it's easy for me to keep them on task, and it's easy for them to be able to feel that and sense that. In terms of, keeping them engaged and in the moment, I think, similar to the example that we brought up earlier, just constantly asking them questions, having them be a part of the learning process. There's even things outside. You mentioned Peter Haberl, who we've worked with for years, and doing some mindfulness before practice, before games and tournaments. And that's something we've kind of been on and off on, but I'm certainly a huge believer in that and our ability to be able to train that aspect. That's something that can be trained and can be taught, and just continuing to work on that awareness as athletes and as coaches.
I appreciate the sentiment that you described around modeling, for your players, that focus and that attention, and not only being able to focus on the right thing at the right time, but also to ignore what's not useful, to ignore the distractions as well. It's kind of this two-part piece, and sometimes those distractions are in our own head as well. We talked a little bit about the self-talk and how I appreciated earlier you saying that some of the best conversations I've had have been with myself. We all have that coach on our shoulder, if you will, and we also have that critic as well, and just learning which one to give our energy to and our focus to, and how to direct that is important. I do want to circle back to what you mentioned at the beginning, because we started with these convictions, and you talked a little bit about some of your fundamental beliefs and values as a coach. And I think you haven't explicitly described all of them per se, but you've certainly it's shown through some of your answers. I'm curious, when you think back to the earliest version of you as a coach, what are some of the beliefs and values for you that have maybe stayed constant, and what are some that have evolved over your career?
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, I haven't changed a ton from the beginning to be real. I think the biggest differences probably is just I think now, and this could be a burden as well, as I have a greater appreciation for the detail involved and what's happening. Also, the consistency required to that attention to detail in order to maintain success and sustain that success over a long period of time. And then I also just think I have a greater perspective and kind of where this all fits into life, and this comes with age, this comes with experiences. I think when I was young, starting out, I was, I certainly believed in the same fundamental values. I just, again, the detail, and this is where I said, I mentioned it kind of can be a burden sometimes because, as you grow older, you have more and more experiences, more and more attention to detail. It becomes a little bit more important to that detail is excellent, but it becomes harder to decipher what is important and what isn't. You're not going to be able to cover and touch on every single thing. So, but in the end, I think the fundamental values of humility and the importance of resilience and connection amongst teams. I mean, those are all things that have just, I think, fundamentally have stayed the same for me over my entire coaching career.
What you're kind of describing, lack of a better way of describing, or lack of a better way of framing it, is this notion of like kind of the curse of competence, right? Where it's like, I mean, the more information that you gather and you learn, which certainly is going to come through your experience, it also comes from you being such a student and somebody who's curious and wants to learn, and just from everything that I've read and listened to, that certainly I hear that to and through your words. But the other piece of this, lost my train of thought. Where was I going to go with this? Is like, oh, that curse of knowledge. Like, I'm curious, like for you, what helps you like have that filter, if you will? Because I think that's something that like we talk about with coaches as well as
Mhm.
athletes too, is like we're in an era where there is more information than ever before. There's more resources, there's more tools, all with wonderful intentions. And there can be unintended consequences of those things as well. And so learning how to have a quality filter, how does that filter work for you, or what kind of helps you filter things so that way you can assess what's most important and what's not?
Yeah, and I will say it becomes more it's a lot more challenging than it was early on because you if you just go through the same process as a coach, a lot of us are fairly controlling, so we want to control everything. And again, as you build this more knowledge and competence, as you said, your ability to be able to control all of those things becomes impossible. So I think for me, it's just as simple as um, just remembering the goals, the objectives, the uh, keeping the main thing, and that is going back to the conversations that we have for ourselves, is just being in tune with that awareness of the conversation you're having with yourself, and then reminding yourself always of those things. And those reminders can come in the form of, they can come organically in your mind, obviously, but they can also come through journaling, writing things down and going back to that book, or where you can reflect on that and just keep you focused. As Peter would always say, it's like that's the guiding light. That's the thing that you're following. And those reminders in that journal. And obviously also having people around you that keep you accountable to those things. And that's what great assistant coaches do. That's what all great staff members do. And when you build a community and a connection within a team, it's not just happening from coach to coach, it's also happening from athlete to coach as well. And
Mm.
that's when things become really special, I think, when you're building something that you're all in unison, working together, holding each other accountable and responsible for the values and the things that are most important to the group.
There's something to be said too about when you foster kind of that two-way relationship between staff and coaches and players too. Like there's more, there can be sometimes this stronger desire to protect things like the culture, or to protect like the standards, because what you've now also done is you've brought in everybody to have a piece in that, and people are more likely to commit to things that they help create. And so I love that notion of how important that has been for you to make sure that that information and learning goes in both directions. You mentioned journaling, which is something that I've heard you reference as well as a practice that over the years you've developed. What sparked that, and what how has journaling served you?
I mean, what sparked it? I was never a big I never was a big writer. Never journaled until my senior year in college. I played water polo at UCLA. We hadn't won a national championship since 1972. It was 1995. I was a senior in college, and so we had been in quite a drought. My brother had gone to UCLA, played water polo, so it was kind of in my blood and my bones. And I had always had this dream of winning a national championship as an athlete. And after your junior year, when it hasn't happened yet, you got one more shot. And I remember kind of feeling the weight and the pressure of that, and kind of saying to myself, well, let's just give it everything we got, for this next year. And that's when I started journaling. I journaled, I don't know if it was every day, but certainly weekly, for a year. And after the end of every journal entry, and it was not just about athletics, it was about my social life and my girlfriend and my family. And so just being able to get it on a page. But at the end of every journal entry, I wrote NC2A champions and with three exclamation marks. And I did that every time. So I must have done it, I don't know, 200 times over 365 days. And, it gets to my senior year, and we have a fabulous year. I won't bore you with the details, but we won a championship. And, I think it was just, for me, it was like, wow. It's like I wrote it down not every day, but, and I knew that there was a chance it wasn't going to happen, but I felt like the more I wrote it down, the better of a chance it was going to happen. And it also helped me to remember what the focus was, and what the goal was.
Well, one of the things, Adam, that I really loved about what you just described in terms of your journaling practice is that how you described putting the NCAA champs at the bottom and
Yeah.
just all the repetition of language and reminding yourself of what you mentioned earlier, like keeping the main thing. Like, what an awesome way to do that over the course of your athletic career, over the course of that particular season. And then to see it pan out the way it did for you and the team. I mean, I can only imagine just the range of emotions that come from that, but also now of how much that practice now can become kind of ingrained into something that you have as a tool to go to for the rest of your career.
Yeah, it's certainly, and the neat thing is being able to look back, after the process is over, whether it was back in 1995, reliving my glory days, or just as a coach and seeing things kind of come to fruition, but also seeing things, seeing the doubt maybe, or the questions that you had, even about yourself, or maybe about your team, or and then being able to see that, no matter what was happening with the questions of doubt, or thoughts of maybe even insecurities at times, you were, or I was able to succeed and have some success kind of even through those question marks. So it's neat to go back, and not that I do it a ton, but it is neat occasionally going back and looking at those notes.
The interesting thing with that is like through our triumphs that we sometimes forget some of the underlying feelings that accompanied those
Yeah,
moments, right?
yeah,
Those doubts, those
yeah,
fears. And so what a
yeah.
wonderful way to circle back and remind ourselves of some of those things, especially over the course of time as distance gets created or increased between that particular moment. Those are things that even for athletes, it's important to be reminded of too.
Yeah, I mean, the things that jump off the page when you say that, and I'm giggling in the background here because I'm thinking of, every time we have success, we win a world championship or you win a gold medal in Olympic Games. I mean, it's just easy to think about, oh, that was just an amazing experience, but you forget about all the difficult times and all the bumps in the road, and at the same time, we finished fourth in the last Olympic Games, which is the first time we hadn't medaled, or hadn't won a gold medal since I've been doing this, and so I think naturally people start, even the athletes and staff. I mean, it's natural to kind of think, oh man, everything was a failure. Like this process was awful. But it's good to have those notes and those reminders, looking back and thinking about all the positive things and the things that you did accomplish, even in moments of in struggle or perceived failure, and vice versa as well.
I appreciated you sharing how that practice of journaling ultimately stemmed from your own athletic career, right? And how that's now kind of continued into your coaching career. And I think it was one of many, I'm sure, but one of the things that you found that helped you ultimately kind of become the best version of yourself at that given time and get as close as you could to your potential. And I've heard you describe some iteration of that, coaching isn't about just getting people to do what you want as the coach. It's also about helping them become who they're capable of being. And I'm just curious, like for you, like what inspired that coaching philosophy and that framework, and maybe also what are some of the ways it's challenged you over time?
It's hard for me to say kind of what inspired that. I mean, for me, it's just it's humility, I guess. I mean, it's not my journey. I'm helping them through the journey. So for me, it's having them take ownership of it. I think of so often just the difference between renting and owning. When you think about renting a car, and how crappy we treat that rental car. Yeah, we don't seem to care when we're going over the speed bump at 60 miles per hour, and we don't worry about the damage necessarily, although they may check when you turn it in. But when you own it, that's yours. It's amazing the attention to detail and the care you have for something when it's yours, when you own it. So I want the athletes ultimately to own their journey. And for me, it has challenged my ability sometimes to communicate effectively. In that, as a coach, you have all this knowledge. We were talking about it earlier, just the competence, and you have all this knowledge. You know what it's supposed to look like, and when someone's not necessarily doing it that way, the easy thing to do sometimes is just say, you know, just the frustration and anger kind of gets to you, and you just tell them what to do. It's not that difficult. I've probably even said this myself. Just do what I tell you to do, and you'll be fine. But and this is the one thing I don't know if this is appropriate or inappropriate to say. So excuse me if it's inappropriate. But this is the one thing I've really enjoyed about coaching women is the with women. And my old coach at UCLA said this, I remember, and it's really sat with me since then. It was, the women want to know why they're doing everything. They want to know a reason. They want some intention behind it. And and I coached for years. I coached the men and the women at UCLA, and kind of seeing the difference. Sometimes with the men, all I had to do was scream a little bit, throw a few F bombs in there, and they do kind of, they just do what you want them to do, and that was fine, and they were fine with that. But with the women, you had to come at it with some intelligence. You had to come at it with some intention, and honestly, it's forced me to be a better coach. It's forced me to be more detailed. It's forced me to explain and to answer those questions as to why are we doing this? Why is this important? Whether it's a tactic or whether it's just the process itself and explaining where it fits in. And I'm naturally a very competitive person. I used to have I feel like my temper is kind of tempered down a bit since I was young. But it's still there, and then she'll still pops up. And sometimes when my frustration and anger get the best of me, I'm not the greatest at explaining the why. And so I'm kind of forgetting your initial question, to be quite honest. I'm just kind of losing myself in this moment, and just the importance of explaining that, of them taking ownership of the process, and me just relentlessly expressing the vision, day in and day out, and then having some justification as to what we're doing.
No, I think you actually nailed the question, because part of this is you just described, like it's painting a picture of that vision, not only for the team but also for that individual and who they're capable of becoming, as along the way then also being really clear and deliberate in explaining why we're doing everything. I think that's like the more time you spend around a lot of high performers in a lot of different settings, is the intentionality behind what they do tends to be turned up in a lot of different aspects of their life. But then ultimately, how that then funnels into, like you mentioned earlier, the difference between renting and owning. And when you have a firmer grasp of the why behind what you do and how that feeds into you becoming who you're capable of being, the best ones they take ownership of that and they drive that.
Yeah, and it's when that happens, it is a pretty incredible sight to see. Um, and it's incredible in terms of their development, their skill development, their water polo IQ. But the beautiful thing, maybe the most beautiful thing, is just the confidence that is earned through that process, of taking ownership of it, and then realizing that it was it was really them who led that development, and that gives them confidence into the next venture, whether it's the next year of playing water polo, or um, moving into business or teaching or being a mother or father, or whatever it may be. But the confidence that comes from that is just is priceless.
When you first started to talk a little bit about coaching philosophy and what goes into it, you use the term humility, and I know sometimes humility can kind of go hand in hand with vulnerability, and obviously vulnerability is over the course of time has gotten more and more attention as it relates to leadership, and explicitly and implicitly, I've heard you talk a little bit about it. What does vulnerability look like for you, maybe behind the scenes as a coach, and just what role does it play in kind of your coaching philosophy?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just about being an honest and real dude. I mean, there's nothing worse for me. I don't. I enjoy people who are just authentically themselves. I mean, obviously with boundaries. It can't be reckless authenticity. There's got to be some boundaries around it. But um, we're in the business. This is a team sport for us, which when we're talking about building teams, it's about building relationships and building connections. So there's no way for us as coaches or as athletes or as team members in general to be able to build those connections without some vulnerability, without some just realness and some open, honest conversation or expressing your thoughts. And I think it can become a little bit more challenging these days with this with social media and people, putting forth an image of their lives that might not necessarily be the reality. And so for me, it's building that connection. It's building that bond that isn't necessarily performative. That's also organic. I think you got to be, you can talk about vulnerability all you want, but it's not can't just come into a meeting and you know cut onions beforehand and start crying. It's got to be real, and it's got to be organic. And but it's amazing when that stuff is happening and you're having those honest and real conversations. And yeah, and which sometimes can be what you asked, like kind of what it looks like. I mean, sometimes it can be a lot of anger and frustration, but sometimes it can be a lot of sadness and many tears. But it's something that when it's organic, it's really connecting and bonding the group.
As you just mentioned, recognizing there can be couple different sides. I think more often than not, people think of vulnerability in the context of a difficult loss or, hardship or going through sadness and those types of emotions. And at the same time, there can also be vulnerability on the other end of the continuum as well. I'm curious for you, if you reflect back on your coaching career, is there a time that stands out for you where like you felt like your vulnerability really, like, again, wasn't maybe like, hey, I'm going to try to be vulnerable in this moment. It was real, it was authentic, but your vulnerability or like the team's vulnerability kind of boiled to the surface, um, whether it was for something wonderful or it was something challenging that the group was going through.
Um, unfortunately, our team has experienced a lot of moments outside of sport that have forced, uh, maybe forced is not the right word, but has put us in the position to have a better perspective on things, and it's forced us to be vulnerable in moments, whether it, be someone surviving an attack of terror to losing a relative or family member to, this past quad, having one of our best athletes who ultimately lost her husband from cancer, kind of going through that process for a year. And I mean, those are the moments that just are so fresh in my mind that happen, that just organically again bring out that emotion and that vulnerability, but it's also partly because I don't. It still wouldn't necessarily happen unless there was a connection or a bond. So even if if someone's really suffering and going through a difficult time, uh, I'd like to think that we'd all just be vulnerable naturally, and we'd feel connected to that person. But it doesn't happen like that. It has to. I mean, we see bad stuff on TV all the time, but it doesn't move us. It only moves us when we have built those bonds and those connections, and that's one of the great things about being part of a team and kind of experiencing the highs and lows of sport, and everything that comes with it is helping to build those bonds that make us tighter and closer, and help us be able to move through those adverse times with a little bit more ease than normally would happen.
I've heard you share in a few conversations in the past around leadership and just your coaching approach. Like you've talked about perspective and just how important that is for as a coach, how important that is to a team, and how important that is to individual kind of athletes. And sometimes we have to our perspective gets broadened or expanded when we deal with maybe some profound form of loss or setback or adversity and so on. For you, what are some of the imprints that you've had from different experiences that have maybe kind of shaped your coaching approach and now has kind of created this or instilled this sense of keeping things in perspective for you and for your athletes?
Yeah, I mean, I think you asked the question earlier just about me as a younger coach, and when I was a younger coach, it seemingly, I don't want to say it was all about winning, but it was definitely much more about winning than it is now. Which we still, I don't want to shy away from the fact that we want to win, and there's a competitiveness and a fight that kind of comes with that process, but now it's to have that perspective. And I think that has largely happened just through experiences, tough experiences. Um, it has allowed me to be a little bit more clear with my conviction on kind of why we're doing this. And I think that I would hope that is seen by the athletes a little bit more. So it allows them to be able to carry forward with a greater purpose than just, trying to win a gold medal or trying to win a world championship. I think when we do that, obviously, it's good and it's good to have those goals and to focus on those things, but we have to be able to put it in perspective in order to really truly take everything out of this process. There's nothing more frustrating for me than uh, going through this 4-year journey, this quadrennium, as we like to call it, to prepare to win, a gold medal. I mean, ultimately, that's what we want to try to do. We're not going to shy away from that. But if that's the only thing we're focused on, then obviously we're missing all the millions and millions of lessons that can be learned through this journey. And it's amazing how easy that is for people to kind of get lost in that process. and it's my responsibility to remind them of it. And through my experiences of loss and adversity, I think it's allowed me to kind of have that perspective and have that calmness of mind to be able to communicate effectively that vision and that perspective that's so important for all of us as we go through this journey.
Uh, I'm gonna make a little bit of an assumption here, so you can correct it if
Yeah.
it's accurate. But I know, with the last Olympic Games, which you referenced, finishing fourth, like I'd imagine that also creates a lot of opportunity for putting some things in perspective, because I also am very mindful of the history of US women's water polo, the history that you've had leading the team and so on, and what I'd imagine were the expectations going into the 2024 Olympic Games. How what are some of the things from a messaging standpoint that you've tried to express um, to your players to kind of help with, how to process that, how to keep things in perspective, and not only for them, but also things that you've had to kind of remind yourself too.
Yeah, I think we're still in the process of that. The Olympics, the tough thing about that journey for us is that sometimes, the Olympics may happen and then you don't see the same people again for a long period of time, or you don't see them in a moment in which you can really address that. And for me, as a coach, people may retire, right? And it's you want to be involved and you want to help them along with that process, but at the same time, you don't want to overstep your now new role of not being their coach anymore. So I think it's a process that's still in works, to be honest, and probably will be for years moving forward. And so for me, I don't know, it's finding the times to have that conversation, but again, not forcing it. I think it is important for them to kind of go through that process, like I said earlier, of kind of self-discovery. And at times it's maybe just asking certain questions that allow for them to think a little bit deeper into it. But I will say it's been amazing, the process of kind of coming up short of your goals, which is something I hadn't experienced. And this sounds arrogant of me, but it's been quite a long time. But in a strange way, I've actually really enjoyed it. I've actually really enjoyed it. It's there's certainly some pain, but sometimes there's nothing like losing or coming up a little short. It's amazing, the emotion and the thought and how much reflection is happening when that happens. And when you win, it's just sometimes it becomes a burden, and it just becomes about how are we going to win again, and not, or when are we going to win again? And not about what could we have done better. I've never reflected more over the last few months than I have after we finished fourth in the Olympics. And there's a growth that comes with that I think is so important still at 50 years old. I know I still have a long way to go in terms of growing as a human and as a person, and in so many different areas. And it's allowed me to be able to dig a little deeper into who I am and what I believe in, and what I could have done better, and what I did well, and all of those things that again allow me to continue to progress as a person.
Debating on where to go with that. I had two different thoughts with it that all converged at one given time. What I'd actually like to well, let me see here. Where do I want to go with this? My question, and I'm very cognizant of the fact that, like as you mentioned, this process is still unfolding, right? There's
Hmm.
there's still a visceralness having gone through it just last summer. And so I know the story isn't complete yet. It's still being written in terms of for the next the next Olympic Games and for you. But I'm curious, like even in that short amount of time, you've talked about your own reflection process and thinking about things that, not only that worked, but also areas of growth and improvement based on sometimes losing, as you mentioned, sometimes really because of the pain, it really challenges us with a sense of urgency to make changes or to start to do things maybe a little bit differently than we had before. In this short time since the Paris Games, are there things that you've already made adjustments to as a leader, as a coach? I know there's a lot of different variables, especially too with the dynamics of the team. But I'm curious, like for you, what have been some of the shifts that you've already seen following that loss?
Yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, I've thought about it a ton. I think for me, um, the biggest shifts have to do with, again, I spoke on this a little bit earlier, is just keeping the main thing. And what as I look back on that process, I think we did a lot of great things, to be honest. And I think it's important to recognize those things. But I felt like I was personally a bit distracted by all of the things that can come with being a leader, can come with being a head coach outside of the team and preparing the team to have success, and um, all of those other things within our organization. Some things that I grew very frustrated with, I think distracted me from my ability to be able to do my job to the best. I still feel like I did a pretty good job, but to the best of my ability. And so it's being able to tune out those things. It's also being able to delegate, which is something that has always been a struggle for me to be able to do. That being able to delegate things and be okay with that delegation and let other people handle it. And some of that just starts with being a little bit more organized in how I perform as well, and what I'm working on. And then, if I am delegating and I'm not distracted by all these other things that I shouldn't be distracted about, I am able to use that time to connect with my athletes and connect with the team. And this is something, I've preached for years and years, going back to when I first started coaching. But it's easy to kind of lose your way in moments, and you need maybe a moment like that, maybe a moment of adversity or losing, or someone around you to kind of tell you and steer you back in the right direction. And now I'd like to think I'm spending a little bit more time getting back to those connections and those relationships that are so important in building teams and setting the culture and setting the standards and expectations that allow for successful teams to ultimately develop.
You mentioned there with just some of the ways in which that you've already made some shifts and changes in your own kind of coaching, not only in actions, but also in reflections as well. And anytime we go through changes, there's a loss built into that, a loss of maybe an old belief, an old thought, letting go. There's that process of change also requires letting go of things as well in the midst of the process. And so with that, I'm kind of curious to kind of shift towards just thinking now on the grander scale, your growth and development as a coach over time. And I'm curious if we were to sit down with the 2004 or an earlier version of you, would there be any surprises that they might have about the way in which you lead or you coach today?
Um, I don't think there would be a ton of surprises. I do, if I had to pinpoint one thing, I think a younger version of myself would be very surprised by my willingness, and not only willingness, but my excitement to have difficult conversations, um, even confrontation. And I think early on in my career, you're young, you're maybe a little bit insecure in kind of who you are, what you believe in. Sometimes you shy away from ruffling feathers, or you might see this big, ugly problem and you just want to sweep it under the rug. Uh, that I am so 180 degrees now from that. So I think that would probably be the biggest. Now for me, it's about actually really enjoying those conversations, enjoying the confrontation. I mean, respectful confrontation. It's enjoying the debate. It's, seeing that that weakness of mine or maybe the team's, and maybe something I'm feeling within the team, and just literally just throwing it on the table and bringing it to the surface, and discussing it with the whole team in that wide open. And I think I, I've been able to do it now because um, I'm more firm in my beliefs and kind of who I am and what I believe in. So that helps me be consistent on a daily basis. But I also see the growth, and I understand the growth that comes from those moments. And I see when I think about confidence building, and I think about growth as teams and kind of pushing beyond these barriers, I think to myself, when those moments of confidence appear and these large steps of growth happen, usually what preceded that was something that was very, very difficult. And literally 99% of the time, I have these uncomfortable conversations or bring these things to the surface with the team or with an individual. 99% of the time, it is a positive in the end. It sucks when you're doing it. And it can be miserable, but I've actually gotten comfortable kind of feeling in that spot and enjoyed watching them kind of squirm and be uncomfortable. But then have enjoyed even more what it's producing on the other end of it. And I think, it's just about flipping adversity and flipping challenges in your mind is not something that's bad. It's actually, this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity for growth. This is an opportunity to build confidence. And I also think I'm blabbering here, but I also think so often athletes will say, well, you just need to have more confidence in me. Um, and I'm like, I don't give you confidence. Like, you get confidence through your actions, through going through difficult times, these difficult moments, through um, seeing a challenge and facing it head on and not running from it, but attacking it. Um, to steal Jim Harbaugh's line, with an enthusiasm known done to mankind, right? It's but they being able to get through those difficult times, and seeing the confidence is just an amazing experience to be able to witness.
In our earlier part of the conversation, you mentioned kind of the importance of modeling, right? And like just like the importance of, hey, when it comes to focus and attention for your team, you kind of setting that standard by how you're showing up and so on. I would imagine it might be similar from this space too, when it comes to receiving difficult information or having a challenging conversation with somebody. Could you tell me about a time as a coach or as a leader where maybe somebody, if we flip the roles for a second, where maybe you were given some, found yourself in a difficult conversation, and how you feel like in retrospect that also helped kind of you take a step forward as a leader?
It's a great question. I think that literally happens daily, and it happens in part because I don't, and it might not happen that's so obvious and out in the open, but I'd like to think I'm fairly self-aware and aware of going back to kind of an emotional intelligence and understanding of when people are buying in and when they're not buying in. Um, it's pretty obvious and clear for me. And so there are moments, maybe not daily, but certainly weekly, in which you feel like you're not connecting. Like someone is not, you can tell that someone is not accepting your feedback or your vision. And it forces you, again, whether you're having that conversation with not, but it forces you to reflect a little bit and to think about, well, how is my messaging? Is my messaging on point now, or am I just completely off base? Or did I not set this up well? Have we, not emphasized the right things? So as much as I am firm, it's this amazing balance of like being really confident in who you are and firm in your beliefs, but also every second almost questioning yourself. Um, and it's a hard thing to understand. But I think it's something that balance is something that's really important. I'll never forget. I mean, maybe the biggest example is when I first took over this job in 2009, and we won a world championship within my first 3 months on the job. And but I think probably 75% of the team wanted me fired. And I was coming from UCLA. We had just won 5 national championships in a row. I had this thing. I was like, this is how we're doing it. It's just had it locked in. This is the process. And um, you have some success and you think, oh, everyone should be happy. We just won a gold medal in world championships. Well, no, 75% of the team hated me and wanted me out. So um, that was a moment, certainly, where you're like, okay, maybe you did some good things, but maybe you got to reevaluate yourself and what's important. Or these aren't the same kids that you're dealing with now. You're not just dealing with college kids. You're dealing with quote unquote professional athletes that have been around a while, that aren't just going to believe you because of the success you've had, in the prior years. You got to kind of earn that respect, and you got to relentlessly express and communicate your vision on a daily basis in order to earn that trust and respect that's so important for us coaches and for us leaders to have throughout our team.
Throughout this conversation, you've made reference to, some of your fellow coaches, staff, the players, different people that you've learned and grown from as well. Like, I think we all know that like it certainly takes a village for all of us to continue
Yeah.
to grow in different ways. And we use that with kids, but over the course of time, we don't use that adage as much with us as adults, but it probably is still just as, if not more relevant than ever. So I'm curious, like for you, if I were to ask you like who is it that coaches you, and that can be either formally or informally, how would you answer that?
I mean, the first thought that comes into my mind is my wife and kids. My wife and kids coach me. I mean, my athletes would love to see what my home life is like. I was having dinner with my kids the other night, and my wife wasn't there. And the somehow it came up as like, what is the one question each of us always ask out loud in front of the whole family? And I think, my wife is amazing. She works full time. She does all the finances. She takes care of the kids. She cooks. She literally does everything here. But the one thing, the one thing she can't find ever is her phone. So that was, I think my daughter said, "Oh, it's mom says, where's my phone?" And I said, "Well, Annabelle, yours is where's mom? That's your one question. It's like always, where's mom? Where's mom? Where's mom?" And I think my son's was what's for dinner? And and then, we were contemplating. I'm like, well, what's mine, guys? And my son said, what did he say? He said, now what did I do wrong? And it is so true. I think there's so often I said, okay, what did I do wrong now? And so they just give it to me. It's just not nonstop. So talk about being humble. When I walk through that front door, I mean, it is. They could care less about gold medals and world championships or NCAA championships. It is you're coming into the um, it's not my domain. But on a serious note, I think it's a tough question because the reality is that being a head coach is like living on an island, a deserted island, and it's not a tropical one. It is one that is very lonely. Um, People may always think that they're prepared to be a head coach when they're assistant coaches, but until you sit in that chair, don't know what it's like. And that's why I am someone who firmly I'm so careful to be critical of head coaches. I think we're all in this. We all need to support each other because we know how difficult it is and how lonely it can be. And so for us to be able to find people that can keep us in check, that can kind of remind us of who we are and what we believe in and what the mission is of the team or the organization is enormously important. So on a serious note, it is my family in some ways because they keep me humble to that perspective that I've spoken about. It's certainly my assistant coaches. I want people that I work with that are able to be able to say, hey, you're a little off base, or kind of steer me back in the right direction. I've used Peter Haberl a ton. He was someone who came on, is the first person I met with back in 2009 as a sports psychologist. And I brought him on thinking he was going to work with the athletes. And little did I know that, a year later and for 15 years, I would probably use him 80% more than everyone else. And he really helped me just understand myself a little bit better, dig a little deeper into kind of who I was and what my philosophy was. Um, but then just constantly trying to learn from everyone around you, again, whether it's coaches or other sports, reading and watching. But as coaches, we need other people. And I don't know if there was an area, honestly, that I'd be interested in moving into past coaching. Um, I think that would be number one for me. It's just helping leaders lead, helping coaches coach, and that's why I'm fascinated by what you do, honestly, Zach, and what others do in that business. And so much of that is sports psychology as well.
You mentioned earlier in the conversation that, you get into it and you think about the X's and O's and the tactics and things. And then obviously there's some admin and detail oriented things that go into it. But there's certainly, we tell our coaches here that like whether you signed up to be a sports psychologist or not, you are like on a day-to-day
No doubt.
basis, just the mental, emotional toll that and it's not just exclusive to baseball, as you mentioned. Like I know that, Olympic sports like water polo, like they certainly create their own sense of toll that is a lot to bear and it's a lot to carry, especially for one person. So if you don't have somebody there who can help you say, hey man, like you're carrying a lot on your shoulders right now. Let me help you take some of that out, or just realize like what's important for you to hold on to or what's important for you to let go of as well. And it sounds like Peter is certainly one of those people for you in different ways. And I'd be curious if you can maybe speaking a little bit more as to, I know you've said you've certainly benefited from his presence and your conversations and him asking questions to get you to maybe think deeper. Maybe what are some of the other ways in which that are more like if you were to kind of describe that a little bit more, what are some of the ways in which you feel like having someone like that has benefited you?
Yeah, well, it's nice. First of all, I'd say it's nice to have someone that's loosely connected to the team, right? It's not necessarily um, I don't want to use the word embedded because it is great to have them embedded within the team, but they're just outside the organization. They're like, so this their perspective, someone who's maybe not in our sport necessarily, so can relate it to other things outside of our sport. Sometimes it's easy for us to be blinded by, our past experiences in our sport, or we just end up surrounding ourselves with very like-minded people and kind of a one way to think. And so for him being on the outside, quote unquote, on the outside I've really appreciated his perspective. And And then the thing that just honestly pops up in my mind too is like he's Austrian. He's from Austria. So he, and not that he isn't an American citizen, but he also has this worldly perspective also that has uh, been very eye-opening for me, as someone who's kind of born and raised here in California and haven't moved very far from Northern California to Southern California, and just to hear his life experiences, what it was like growing up in Austria and the history there, and that part of the world has been fascinating. And then for me, just to be able to, he's helped me just understand a little bit better about who I am, what I believe in, and sometimes it's just reinforcing kind of what I already believe in as something that I should hold on to. And then his big thing with mindfulness is has always been, and this is something I definitely didn't understand until he joined our program in 2009, was your I don't know the best way I could say it, but your thoughts, essentially your thoughts don't necessarily control your actions. Um, and we can't control our thoughts, but we can control our actions. So um, whether they're positive thoughts or negative thoughts or all sorts of thoughts across the board, ultimately we have a choice in the actions that we make. We could be nervous as heck going into a game, but that doesn't, and not very confident, to be honest, but that doesn't necessarily equate to a bad performance. Sometimes actually that fear or an appropriate amount of fear can help us have some success. And he's, whereas I think early on before he joined, I was more of a thought of like, why am I thinking like this? This is not good. Red light, red light, red light. You know, things are just going to go down the tubes. But now I can notice those thoughts, be aware of them, and then be able to understand where I want to put my attention and how I want to focus and how I want to carry forward and what my actions are going to be after those thoughts occur.
It's a really empowering space to operate from when you realize that you can separate those actions from feelings and actions from thoughts, and you can feel one way, but that doesn't mean that you have to act in accordance to that. And I love what you mentioned about like, we don't control our thoughts. One of the terms that are the distinctions that we've talked a little bit about with some of our players in our organization is like differentiating thoughts and thinking. And thoughts, like you don't control your thoughts, but you do have a choice in whether or not you engage in thinking. And as we know, as human beings, sometimes that thinking is not always the most helpful. It's not always the most productive. And so learning how to then direct your focus in a way that's meaningful to you and in alignment with your values and so on down the line, that mindfulness and other practices are certainly great ways to enforce that. Certainly hit home here as well. And I think that's a nice tie-in. I just had a couple questions. I want to be mindful of your time. I know this is an
Mhm.
off day and probably one of few and far between. So I'm really grateful for, again, you taking some time out of that to share with us, Adam. But with that, I'm curious, like you mentioned the island that head coaches can be on and the toll that comes with that. I can only imagine what that toll is, especially for running an organization and a program like USA Water Polo that has had the history that it's had, that has the expectations and pressures and all of that built in. What advice would you give to other coaches out there in terms of ways in which to help kind of manage some of the tools around coaching and or some of the practices that you feel like you lean on to kind of keep you grounded amidst all of that?
Oh, the first thing that pops in my mind, it's different for everyone. I'm not going to tell people exactly what to do. I will tell you what works for me. And um, what works for me is number one, kind of like just taking care of yourself. And when I think about that, I think for me, it's just fitness. It's working out. It's I feel awful about myself when I'm not in shape. Not that I'm in great shape by any stretch of the imagination now, but um, so that that fitness allows me to think a little bit clearer, to be a little bit more relaxed. When I'm not working out, I can just feel the tension and stress building. So it's an important part of I wouldn't say necessarily always a daily routine, but for the most part, a daily routine. I also think um, it's about hiring people, getting people in your circle that you truly love, like and that you respect as people. Um, Not that are just great coaches. And if you can marry those two, great, obviously. But for us, we spend a lot of time together. In fact, for us, there's moments in which we're literally traveling the world for 5 or 6 weeks straight. So if it becomes just about water polo and you're around these people just because, and particularly your staff, just because of their ability to be able to be really good at their jobs. And again, that obviously that is important. But if that is the only thing, and you don't really enjoy them as people, and you don't have a connection and respect them for who they are and the values that they live by, then you're not going to enjoy the process as much, and it's going to be much easier to be isolated and to feel that on an island where I truly love the people that I work with. They're some of the best coaches and doctors and trainers and strength coaches and psychologists, managers that I've ever seen, but they're even better people, and more enjoyable to be around. So when we have an off day or half a day, or we're able to kind of, no one takes themselves too seriously, and we're able to do our work with some humility and some joy as well. And that's kind of helped me keep that perspective and um, keep me fresh and loose. And obviously for me, I mention my family a ton. When I come home and I see my kids and my wife, it's always a reminder every single day. It's a reminder that water polo, being a water polo coach is kind of what I do. It's not necessarily who I am. It's a big part of what I do, and it is a slight part of kind of who I am. But ultimately, it's this enjoyment I have for my family and my friends and all the relatives and all the people that I love in my life that allow me to have that perspective that for the most part keep me calm or get me refocused on what's important.
Mm, yeah, I love that. I love the themes that have shown up now a few times in the conversation and family. I know it's funny. There's a theme throughout a number of these other conversations that we've had in this season with other coaches about family always gets brought up generally towards the end, but we also know how important they are along the way. I also circling back to you describing how your kids coach you and what that looks like. I love the dinner table example.
Nonstop. It's
It's am
nonstop.
it's amazing them being sponges and what you don't realize that they may hear. So I love that. And then that kind of leads me to now my last question here. It's the question I like to wrap up each episode with is Adam, what's something that you're proud of that maybe you don't always get an excuse to share or to talk about?
Oh man. Um, Something I'm proud of that I don't always get a chance to share. I mean, uh, man, there's so many things that I'm proud of. I I think it's hard to just pinpoint one thing. I mean, obviously,
You can choose multiple. That's fine.
yeah. I mean, for me, it's the things that are popping in my mind are my family, obviously my kids. When you see, you want to raise kids who, and they're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and not that I'm not on them about certain things. But when you raise children who you feel like are just good kids who have respect for other people who care for others, who are hardworking. That's as a parent. I mean, there's just nothing better than that. I don't talk about them very much. So any chance I do, I will a tad. Uh, for me, God, what I'm proud of. I'm also proud of just being resilient. Not to tell you my whole life story, but I was not a very great athlete. I was a decent water polo player coming out of high school. I think many people would probably were surprised that I went to a school like UCLA, and um, I think I've always felt like I was doubted a bit. So being able to overcome those things, to be able to be a team captain at UCLA for 2 years. Honestly, my greatest honor that I wouldn't trade for anything was being, and not many people know this, and I'm hesitant to even say it because people might not think it's that big of a deal, but for me, it's a big deal. Um, I was named most inspirational by my teammates for 3 consecutive years, sophomore, junior, and senior year at UCLA. And there's no greater feeling in the world than when you earn that respect and you inspire other people, especially your peers. So it's still, I get goosebumps thinking about it. I trade all the gold medals for that. I wouldn't trade all the gold medals for that. I mean, that is, and that has in some ways framed my coaching, because not in that I want to continue to inspire, but I want to urge my athletes to inspire their teammates, because there's nothing like that bond and that connection. As coaches, I think in a lot of ways we're just want to be athletes. We want to be in their shoes and we want to feel that connection. And so, in some ways, we live vicariously through them. And I'm jealous of them every day, being able to share that connection and that bond and inspire each other. And as a coach, you feel connected, but it's not the same connection. You'll never feel the same connection that you do when you're an athlete. So hopefully my athletes are enjoying that process, and they may lose their way at times, but it's why I'm there, is to help remind them how special of a moment there is when they're working a job 9 to 5 and they're behind a desk and wearing a suit and tie, or have to dress up, and they think. They're going to think back and, God, I wish I was on the pool deck, or I wish I was in that team meeting room, or I wish I was traveling overseas and experiencing the joys of being a part of a team and sharing that experience with others.
One of my favorite exercises that I've done with some players, and we've kind of turned it into a form of a meditation practice, is to go back in time. So go back 20, 30, however many years, depending on who the person is, and go back to that younger version of you and think as to how they would feel about where you're at today. How
Yeah.
proud would they be of
Yeah.
where you're at, what you've overcome, how you've matured, how you've grown, all those things. And in the same way, too, you can also go 20, 30 years into the future and think now as to how that individual would think, that version of you would think about where you're at right now. And you'd probably live with a little bit different level of urgency, different focus, different appreciation, even through some of life's most difficult moments too. It's can be such a, we talked about perspective earlier in the conversation a few times, and that has become a practice and an exercise that is been a great perspective builder, but I love what you shared because it's so evident that we can go back in time and see these seeds as to what ultimately maybe were nurtured and watered to make you become who you are today as a coach and what's important to you and your values. The last thing I'll say with it, we had another guest on earlier in the season, Kevin Eastman, and one of the things he shared that I really loved was he said there's a very popular definition that we like to give for leadership, and we'll say like leadership is influence. And he's like, that's not good enough for me. He was like, leadership and influence, like he's like, that's like the baseline. He was like,
Yeah.
the next level is you lead for impact. And then the third level is you lead to inspire. But I think we may need to add a fourth level, which you describe, which is not only leading, but leading to inspire those that you're leading to and then inspire others, and actually now reciprocate that that outward. So I love that example, and it's cool to hear how I appreciate you sharing something that maybe not a lot of people know. It was evident how important that is to you. So I loved hearing that.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. That's I love what Kevin said there. And sometimes this is why you need people like yourself around a little bit, so you can even be clear, and help communicate your own my own thoughts. But I love that exercise too about the younger self and thinking about how proud they would be. I'm definitely going to steal that one, Zach. So appreciate that.
Yeah, no, no, please do. I was gonna say, I think a lot of people I know in our profession, we always say we're all master thieves. We're all just kind of borrowing
No
and
doubt.
adding our own little artistic spin on it. So, but Adam, I'm again, I'll say it again. I'm just thankful that you took some time out of an off day to share with those listening, and really grateful for that, and excited to continue to follow your coaching journey as well.
Well, I appreciate you. You talk about inspiration. I said this before we started, but sometimes you're hesitant whether to jump on these or not, to be honest, but I've respected your work. And I also just know that how much inspiration that's going to, how much stimulation that's going to occur and that's going to allow me and help me to be a better coach and better leader too moving forward. So thanks for having me.